Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human ship New Horizon and watched the massive alien vessel approach. The Corellian warship looked like a giant metal insect covered in sharp edges and glowing lights. It was 3 times bigger than his own ship and carried enough weapons to destroy a small moon. "They're hailing us, sir," said Communications Officer Kate Murphy from her station. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see her hands shaking slightly on the controls. "Put them through," Jake replied. He straightened his blue diplomatic uniform and tried to look confident. This was humanity's first official meeting with the Corellian Empire, and everyone back on Earth was watching. The main screen flickered, and suddenly, Jake was looking at something that made his breath catch. The alien standing before him was covered from head to toe in biomechanical armor that seemed to move and breathe like living metal. The armor was dark green with silver highlights, and strange symbols glowed along its surface. Most impressive of all was the helmet, which had no visible face but instead showed shifting patterns of light where eyes should be. "I am War Prime Zix Thera of the Corellian Third Fleet," the alien said through a translation device. The voice was deep and commanding, though Jake couldn't tell if it was male or female. "You are the humans who requested this meeting." "That's correct," Jake said, stepping forward. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison, representing Earth and the Human Alliance. We're honored to meet with you." Dr. Lisa Park, the mission's alien expert, stood beside him with her tablet ready. She had studied every piece of information humanity had about the Corellians, which wasn't much. Engineer Sam Lewis and Captain Ryan Cole flanked them, trying to look professional despite the obvious tension in the room. "Your species is young," Zix Thera said, tilting her armored head. "We have watched your expansion into space. You move quickly for such a new people." "We're eager to learn," Jake replied, "and to make friends with other species who share our values." The War Prime's armor made a sound that might have been laughter, though it was hard to tell through the translation system. Values, an interesting concept. What values do humans claim to hold? Jake had prepared for this question. "We believe in protecting those who can't protect themselves. We value courage, loyalty, and the freedom to choose our own path. We think all thinking beings deserve respect and dignity." "Pretty words," Zix Thera said, "but words are wind. Actions speak truth." The conversation continued for nearly an hour. The Corellians asked hard questions about human history, their wars, their mistakes. Jake answered honestly, even when the truth wasn't flattering. Dr. Park helped with technical details, while the rest of his team stayed alert for any signs of trouble. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Both sides were feeling each other out, trying to understand what the other really wanted. The Corellians were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. Humans were the newcomers, still learning how to survive in a dangerous universe. "You say you value courage," Zix Thera said finally. "But what do you offer the Corellian Empire? What makes humans worthy of our attention?" Jake felt the weight of the moment. Everything they had worked for came down to this question. Back on Earth, billions of people were depending on him to make the right impression. Humanity needed allies, and the Corellians were some of the strongest fighters in the galaxy. He decided to take a risk with humor, something very human. "Well," he said with a slight smile, "Earth's greatest treasure isn't our technology or our resources. It's our people. Warriors and leaders like you, who know what it means to fight for something bigger than themselves." The words had barely left his mouth when something went wrong with the Corellian translation system. Instead of the respectful compliment Jake intended, the device seemed to malfunction, creating strange buzzing sounds and flashing lights. The other Corellians in the room suddenly went very still. Their armor made clicking and whirring sounds as they turned to look at their leader. Even through the translation problems, Jake could sense that something important had just happened. Zix Thera stood motionless for a long moment. Then slowly she raised her armored hands to her helmet. Her fingers found hidden controls that Jake hadn't even noticed, and there was a soft hissing sound as seals released. Commander?" Dr. Park whispered urgently. "I think something's wrong with their translator. What you said might not have come through correctly." But it was too late to take back the words. Whatever Jake had accidentally said, it had clearly struck a nerve with the War Prime. The other Corellians were backing away, their armor systems making sounds of what Jake could only guess was shock or surprise. Zix Thera's hands continued working at her helmet controls. More seals released with soft hissing sounds. Jake watched in fascination and growing worry as the mighty Corellian warrior began to remove the helmet, that no human had ever seen her without. "Sir," Captain Cole said quietly, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Should we be concerned?" Nobody moved, Jake ordered, though his own heart was racing. "Let's see what happens." The helmet came free with a final hiss of escaping air. For the first time in human history, they were seeing the face of a Corellian war prime. What they saw took everyone by surprise. The face beneath the helmet was more human-like than anyone had expected, though clearly alien. Zixathera had silver-tinted skin with fine scales around her temples and neck. Her eyes were large and golden, with an intelligence that the helmet's light display had hidden completely. 2 small ridges ran along her forehead, and her hair was a deep blue-black color that seemed to shimmer in the ship's lights. But most surprising of all was the expression on her face. Gone was the cold, mechanical presence of the armored warrior. Instead, Jake saw something that looked almost vulnerable, uncertain, and very, very serious. "The Korthek begins," she said in clear, unaccented human English. "No translation device needed. You have spoken the words. I accept the challenge of trust." Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what Korthek meant, but he was pretty sure he had just accidentally started something very important and very complicated. The other Corellians were still backing away, and their leader was starting to remove more pieces of her armor. He looked at Dr. Park, hoping for guidance, but she looked just as confused as he felt. Whatever Jake had accidentally triggered by his innocent joke about wanting people like her, there was no going back now. The diplomatic meeting had just become something else entirely. Dr. Lisa Park stared in shock as more pieces of the War Prime's armor began to detach from her body. Each section that came free revealed more of the alien woman beneath, and Lisa's scientific mind was racing to understand what was happening. "Commander Morrison," Lisa whispered urgently, "I think your translator malfunctioned. What you said about wanting people like her might have been interpreted as something completely different." Jake kept his eyes on Zixathera, who was now working on the armor covering her shoulders and arms. "What kind of different?" he asked quietly. "I'm not sure, but in some cultures, direct statements about wanting someone can be taken as—" Lisa paused, her face turning red, "as romantic proposals." Captain Ryan Cole, who had been watching the other Corellians nervously, stepped closer. "Sir, their body language suggests this is some kind of ceremony. Should we intervene?" Before Jake could answer, one of the other Corellians spoke up. This one was smaller than Zixathera, but still imposing in full armor. "I am Subprime Kellamore," the alien said through his translation device. "You have witnessed something that has not happened in 3 of your centuries. The War Prime has begun the Korthek, the unveiling of trust." "The what?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. "Your words were heard as a formal declaration of intent," Kellamore explained. His armor made clicking sounds that might have been the Corellian equivalent of nervous laughter. "In our culture, when someone says they want another person directly and publicly, it is considered a proposal for life bonding." Engineer Sam Lewis, who had been quietly working on his tablet, looked up with wide eyes. "Sir, I've been running the translation logs. The malfunction made your words come out as, 'I want you' instead of 'people like you.' In Corellian culture, that's apparently a very serious thing to say." Jake felt his stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of diplomatic disaster that could ruin humanity's chances of making allies. "Can we stop this? Explain it was a mistake?" Kellamore's armor shifted in what Jake was learning to recognize as negative body language. To refuse the Korthek once it has begun would be considered an insult of the highest order. It would mean the Corellian Empire would view humanity as untrustworthy liars. "This could mean war between our peoples." "War?" Kate Murphy spoke up from her communication station. "Sir, I've got Earth Command asking for updates." "What should I tell them?" "Tell them we're in the middle of delicate negotiations," Jake said, though that was the understatement of the century. He turned back to watch Zixathera, who had now removed most of her upper body armor. What he saw surprised him again. Beneath the mechanical shell, the Corellian leader was more graceful and elegant than he had expected. Her silver skin caught the light beautifully, and the scales along her arms formed patterns that were almost artistic. But he could also see scars, evidence of many battles fought and survived. "She's removing her protection," Lisa observed quietly. "For a warrior species, this must be incredibly vulnerable." Zixathera looked up from her work and spoke directly to Jake. Dr. Park is correct. What I do now goes against every instinct of my people. We have not shown our true selves to other species for many generations. Her English was perfect, with no trace of the mechanical translation voice. Jake realized she had been understanding everything they said all along. You speak our language, he said. I have studied human transmissions for years. Zixthera replied as she continued removing armor pieces. Your entertainment programs, your news broadcasts, your music. I found your species interesting. If you understood me, Jake said carefully, then you know my words were meant as a compliment, not a proposal. Zixthera paused in her armor removal and looked directly at him. Her golden eyes were intense and intelligent. I understood perfectly, Commander Jake Morrison. Your joke was clear, but I chose to interpret it as a formal declaration anyway. The human crew exchanged confused glances. Why? Jake asked. Because, Zixthera said, beginning to work on her leg armor. The Corellian Empire has been isolated for too long. We have hidden behind our armor and our strength, but hiding has made us weak in ways that matter more than physical power. Kellamore made sounds of disapproval through his translator. War Prime revealing our vulnerabilities to aliens is dangerous. The ancient protocols exist for good reasons. The ancient protocols are killing us slowly. Zixthera replied firmly. We face enemies that our strength alone cannot defeat. We need allies, and allies require trust. Trust requires vulnerability. Sam Lewis looked up from his tablet again. Commander, I'm picking up some concerning readings. There are several ships on the edge of our sensor range. They're not broadcasting identification signals. Ryan Cole immediately moved to the tactical display. Unknown vessels, sir. They're keeping their distance, but they're definitely watching us. Zixthera's head snapped up, her armor making warning sounds. Show me, she commanded. Sam transferred his readings to the main screen. Several small dark shapes appeared at the edge of scanner range. They were clearly ships, but unlike anything in human or Corellian databases. Void swarm scouts, Kellamore said, and his armor made sounds that Jake was sure indicated fear. They have found us. What's the void swarm? Lisa asked. Zixthera had stopped removing armor and was now reattaching some pieces. An ancient enemy that consumes entire star systems. They have been advancing through our space for decades, but we have faced them alone. Our pride and our armor have prevented us from seeking help. Jake began to understand. That's why you chose to continue with this ceremony. You need allies against this threat. The Corellians are mighty warriors, Zixthera said, but we are not enough alone. Your species is young but adaptable. You think in ways we do not. You might be the key to survival for both our peoples. The ships on the scanner began moving closer. Ryan Cole's fingers moved over his weapons controls. Sir, they're not responding to our hails, and they're jamming our communications with Earth. The scouts are testing us, Kellamore explained. They want to see how the new species fights. They want to study human tactics. Jake looked around at his crew. Kate Murphy was trying frantically to break through the communication jamming. Sam Lewis was analyzing the alien ship's technology. Ryan Cole was preparing for battle. Dr. Park was taking readings of everything, her scientific mind still working even in crisis. And in the center of it all stood Zixthera, half in armor and half vulnerable, representing her entire species' willingness to trust humanity at the moment when that trust might be needed most. War Prime, Jake said formally. I accept the responsibility of the Korthek. Whatever that means for our peoples, we'll face it together. Zixthera smiled for the first time since removing her helmet. It was a beautiful expression that transformed her entire face. Then let us see what humans and Corellians can accomplish when we fight as one. The unknown ships were getting closer, and Jake knew that this diplomatic meeting was about to become humanity's first test as potential allies to one of the galaxy's most powerful warrior species. The joke that had started this whole situation was about to become something much more serious. The alien ships moved closer like hunting sharks circling their prey. Jake watched the tactical display as the Void Swarm scouts spread out in a pattern that looked disturbingly organized. These weren't random raiders. They were professional killers studying their targets. Zixthera stood beside him, still half-armored and more vulnerable than any Corellian had been in front of aliens for centuries. But instead of fear, Jake saw determination in her golden eyes. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. Tell me about these Void Swarm, Jake said quietly, while his crew prepared for possible combat. They are older than both our species, Zixthera replied. They travel between galaxies, consuming everything in their path. Planets, stars, entire civilizations. Nothing survives their passage. Dr. Lisa Park looked up from her scanner readings. How do they consume stars? We do not know, Zixthera admitted. Our greatest scientists have studied them for generations. They use technology we cannot understand. They turn living worlds into empty husks, then move on to find new hunting grounds. Subprime Kellamore approached, his armor making nervous clicking sounds. Warprime, the scouts are taking detailed scans of both ships. They are studying human technology for the first time. Let them look, Jake said, surprising everyone. Sam, are you recording their scanning methods? Engineer Sam Lewis nodded enthusiastically. Yes, sir. I'm learning as much about them as they are about us. Zixthera's expression showed approval. This is why your species interests me, Commander. You turn every challenge into a learning opportunity. Corellians would simply prepare to fight. Fighting is important, Jake acknowledged. But understanding your enemy is more important. Lisa, what can you tell me about their ships? Dr. Park studied her readings carefully. They're organic, sir. Not built, grown. The hulls appear to be some kind of living tissue, but harder than any metal. And they're not using conventional engines. How are they moving? Captain Ryan Cole asked while checking his weapon systems. I think they're manipulating space itself, Lisa said in amazement. They're riding waves in the fabric of reality. That's how they can travel between galaxies. Zixthera moved closer to look at the human scanner displays. Jake noticed that without her full armor, she moved differently, more gracefully, more naturally. The biomechanical shell had been constraining her natural movements. Your technology reads deeper than ours, she observed. Our scanners show only surface details. Yours penetrate to the quantum level. Different approaches to the same problems, Jake said. That's why cooperation works better than isolation. Communications Officer Kate Murphy suddenly looked up from her station. Sir, I'm getting something weird. The jamming isn't random, it's got patterns in it. What kind of patterns? Like they're trying to communicate, but not with words, with mathematics. Sam Lewis quickly moved to Kate's station and began running the signal through translation programs. She's right. This is definitely structured. They're sending prime numbers, then geometric sequences, then... He paused, his face going pale. Sir, they're sending star charts. Specifically charts showing dead systems. Worlds they've already consumed. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. They're showing us what they've done to other species. It is a warning, Kellamore said grimly. They are telling us our fate. Submit or be consumed. Or, Zixthera said thoughtfully, they are testing to see if we can understand their message. Perhaps they respect intelligence as well as strength. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Kate, send them back the same mathematical sequence, but add something to it. Send them the formula for faster-than-light travel that humans developed. Sir? Kate looked confused. If they're testing our intelligence, let's show them what human creativity can do. Sam, help her encode our FTL mathematics into their signal pattern. Zixthera stared at Jake in surprise. You would share your travel secrets with the enemy? I'm sharing them with the universe, Jake replied. If these Void Swarm are as intelligent as they seem, they'll understand that we're not trying to hide our capabilities. We're demonstrating them. The two humans worked quickly to encode humanity's faster-than-light drive equations into the alien signal format. Within minutes, they were broadcasting back to the Void Swarm scouts. The response was immediate. The alien ships stopped their aggressive positioning and moved into a different formation, one that Lisa recognized as a mathematical pattern called a Fibonacci spiral. They're responding, she breathed. They understood our message and they're replying with advanced mathematics. But Zixthera was looking at something else entirely. Warprime, Kellamore said urgently. Look at their ship formations. Jake followed their gaze and saw what had caught their attention. The Void Swarm scouts weren't just making patterns. They were forming the exact same spiral that human and Corellian children learned in basic mathematics classes. It was a universal constant, something that appeared in nature across all known species. They're showing us commonality, Jake realized. They're demonstrating that despite our differences, we all understand the same universal truths. Suddenly, the lead Void Swarm ship sent a new signal. This time it wasn't mathematics, it was images. The humans and Corellians watched in fascination as their screens filled with pictures of different species from across the galaxy. But these weren't pictures of conquest or destruction. They were images of cooperation, of different species working together, building things, creating art, raising families. I don't understand, Ryan Cole said. I thought they were supposed to be destroyers. Zixthara was studying the images intently. Look carefully at the backgrounds, she said. Those are not random worlds. Those are the planets we thought had been consumed. Jake examined the images more closely. She was right. The worlds in the pictures matched the star charts of dead systems the Void Swarm had shown them earlier. They're not destroyers, he said in amazement. They're collectors. They're preserving species by relocating them. Dr. Park gasped as the implications hit her. That's why the planets appear dead on our scans. The Void Swarm isn't killing these civilizations, they're moving them somewhere else. But why? Kellamore asked. Another image appeared on their screens. This one showed the galaxy from a vast distance, with dark regions spreading between star systems like an infection. Something else is coming, Zixthara said quietly. Something worse than the Void Swarm. They are trying to save as many species as possible before it arrives. Jake looked around at his crew, then at the Corellian warriors. The situation had just become much more complex than anyone had imagined. What had started as a diplomatic meeting and turned into a misunderstood marriage proposal was now revealing itself as humanity's first contact with beings trying to save the galaxy. War Prime, Jake said formally. I think we need to finish our conversation about alliances, but not just between humans and Corellians. Zixthara nodded solemnly. Indeed, Commander. It appears we all have much larger concerns than we realized. The Void Swarm scouts began moving again, but this time their formation was clearly an invitation. They were asking the humans and Corellians to follow them. Jake knew that whatever decision he made next would determine not just the fate of his crew, but possibly the future of both their species. The armor that Zixthara had removed was nothing compared to the barriers of mistrust and misunderstanding that were falling away as they faced this new revelation together. Jake stared at the invitation from the Void Swarm ships and felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. Everything they thought they knew about the galaxy had just changed, and now he had to decide whether to trust beings that every species feared. Commander, Captain Ryan Cole said quietly, Earth Command still doesn't know what's happening here. If we follow those ships and something goes wrong... I know, Jake replied. But if we don't, we might miss the chance to save both our species from whatever's coming. Zixthara stepped closer, her partial armor catching the light from the tactical displays. There is something you should understand about Corellian history, she said. 300 years ago, we trusted another species completely. We removed our armor for them, shared our technology, opened our worlds to them. What happened? Dr. Lisa Park asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be pleasant. They used our trust to map our defenses, learn our weaknesses, and then they attacked without warning. Millions of Corellians died before we could respond. Since that day, we have never shown vulnerability to any other species. Subprime Kellamore made sounds of agreement through his translator. The Betrayer War taught us that trust leads to death. Only strength keeps us safe. Jake looked at Zixthara with new understanding. But you're doing it anyway. You're removing your armor, showing vulnerability to us. Because, Zixthara said, meeting his eyes, isolation has become its own kind of death. We have been so focused on protecting ourselves that we stopped truly living. We stopped growing, stopped learning, stopped connecting with the universe around us. Engineer Sam Lewis looked up from his analysis of the Void Swarm signals. Sir, I've been studying their communication patterns. They're not just showing us images of relocated species. They're showing us how those species adapted and thrived in their new homes. What do you mean? Jake asked. Sam transferred new data to the main screen. Look at these population numbers. The species that were consumed by the Void Swarm actually grew larger and healthier in their new locations. Whatever these beings are doing, it's working. Kate Murphy suddenly straightened at her communication station. Sir, I'm getting a direct transmission from the lead Void Swarm ship. It's addressing you specifically. Put it through, Jake ordered. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that defied description. The being on the screen was constantly shifting, like it was made of living starlight. Its form suggested intelligence, but it was unlike anything in any database. Human called Jake Morrison, the being said in perfect English. Corellian called Zixthara. We have observed your exchange of trust. This is why we chose to reveal ourselves to you. Jake stepped forward. You've been watching us? We observe all species when they reach the threshold of interstellar cooperation. Most fail the test of vulnerability. They choose fear over trust, isolation over connection. These species cannot be preserved. Preserved from what? Zixthera demanded. The being's form shifted and new images appeared on the screen. What they saw made everyone in both crews gasp in horror. A wave of absolute darkness was spreading across the galaxy. Not just consuming worlds, but erasing them entirely. Where it passed, even space itself became empty void. The great silence approaches, the being explained. It does not consume or relocate. It simply ends. Everything it touches ceases to exist. Matter, energy, information, even the memory of what was there before. Dr. Park was frantically taking readings. That's impossible. You can't just delete matter from the universe. You are correct, the being agreed. It should be impossible. But the great silence comes from outside our reality. It operates by rules we do not understand. Jake felt his mind struggling to grasp the implications. How long do we have? At its current rate of expansion, it will reach human and Corellian space in approximately 200 of your years. But its movement is accelerating. Zixthera stepped forward, her armor making determined sounds. What can be done to stop it? It cannot be stopped, the being replied. But it can be escaped. We have found safe spaces between galaxies where the great silence cannot reach. But the journey requires cooperation between many species, combining different technologies and capabilities. Sam Lewis was studying the technical data flowing across his screen. Sir, they're showing us the requirements for their evacuation ships. No single species has all the necessary technologies. Humans have quantum processing capabilities they need. Corellians have biomechanical integration systems. The Void Swarm provides reality manipulation engines. And dozens of other species contribute other essential components, the being added. This is why we test for cooperation and trust. Species that cannot work together cannot survive the journey to safety. Jake looked around at his crew, then at the Corellian warriors. What happened to species that refused to cooperate? The screen showed images of empty star systems not relocated but truly dead. They remained isolated until the great silence reached them. They ceased to exist. Captain Cole moved closer to Jake. Sir, this is a lot to process. How do we know this isn't some kind of elaborate deception? Before Jake could answer, alarms began blaring on both ships. The tactical displays showed new contacts appearing at the edge of their sensor range. But these weren't the organic curves of Void Swarm vessels. These ships were angular and aggressive, clearly built for war. Unknown vessels approaching fast, Kate Murphy reported. They're jamming all communications and charging weapons. Zixthera's entire demeanor changed as her warrior instincts kicked in. Those are betrayer ships, she said grimly. The species that destroyed our trust 3 centuries ago. They must have followed us here. War Prime, Kellamore called urgently. You cannot fight them without full armor. You are too vulnerable. Jake watched as Zixthera faced a terrible choice. She could rearm herself and become a proper Corellian warrior again. But that would mean abandoning the trust she had shown to humanity. Or she could remain vulnerable and risk not just her own life, but the lives of both crews. The betrayer ships were getting closer, and Jake could see weapons charging on their hulls. Whatever decision they made had to be made quickly. War Prime, he said formally. I propose a new kind of cooperation. Zixthera looked at him questioningly. Keep your armor off, Jake said. Fight alongside us as a partner, not as an isolated warrior. Let us protect your vulnerable spots while you use your experience to guide our tactics. The Void Swarm being watched this exchange with what might have been approval. This is the test, it said quietly. Will you trust each other when death approaches? Will you choose cooperation over self-protection? Zixthera looked at Jake for a long moment, then at her own people, then at the approaching enemy ships. Finally, she smiled, that beautiful smile again. I accept your proposal, Commander Jake Morrison. Let us show the galaxy what humans and Corellians can accomplish together. The first enemy weapons fired, and the real test of their alliance began. The first enemy blast shook both ships as the betrayer vessels opened fire, with weapons designed to destroy Corellian armor. Jake watched the tactical display as the angular warships moved in attack formation, clearly confident they knew how their old enemies would respond. Ryan, evasive maneuvers, Jake ordered, but stay close to the Corellian ship. We're fighting this together. Captain Ryan Cole's fingers danced over the helm controls as the New Horizon twisted away from incoming fire. The ship wasn't built for combat, but human engineering had made it surprisingly agile. Zixthera stood at Jake's side, still half-armored and vulnerable, but her golden eyes were fierce with determination. "Commander, your ship cannot withstand their weapons. You must let me return to my vessel and fight properly." "No," Jake said firmly. "We do this together." "What are their weaknesses?" "They rely on overwhelming firepower and expect their enemies to scatter," Zixthera replied. "Their ships are heavily armored in front but weaker on the sides and rear." "Sam," Jake called to his engineer, "can you link our targeting systems with the Corellian ship?" "Already working on it, sir," Sam Lewis replied, his hands flying over his console. "Their technology is compatible with ours in ways I didn't expect." Dr. Lisa Park looked up from her scanner readings. "Commander, the betrayer ships aren't just attacking us. They're trying to destroy the Void Swarm vessels, too." Jake saw she was right. The enemy was firing on all three groups, trying to prevent any alliance from forming. "They don't want us to cooperate," he realized. "They profit from keeping species isolated and afraid." The Void Swarm being's image flickered back onto their screen. "The betrayers have followed this pattern for millennia," it explained while reality-warping energy deflected their attacks. "They prevent cooperation between species, then conquer the isolated survivors." Another blast rocked the human ship, and sparks flew from several control panels. Kate Murphy fought to keep communications working, while Sam struggled to maintain the targeting link with the Corellians. "War Prime, Subprime." Kelmore's voice came through the comm system. "Our weapons cannot penetrate their front armor. We need a new strategy." Zixthera looked at Jake with trust in her eyes. "What do you propose, partner?" Jake studied the enemy formation and saw something the betrayers didn't expect: human creativity combined with Corellian warrior instincts. "We're going to do something no one's tried before. Zixthera, can your people target their rear shields while we attack from the front?" "That would be suicide for your ship," she protested. "Their forward weapons will destroy you." "Not if we're moving fast enough," Jake said with a grin that reminded her why humans were considered unpredictable. "Sam, transfer all power from life support to engines and shields. We're going to ram straight at them, then dive under their firing line at the last second." "Sir, that's insane," Captain Cole said, but his hands were already moving to implement the crazy plan. "Exactly," Jake replied. "They know Corellian tactics, but they've never seen how humans fight. Lisa, I need you to coordinate with their science officer. Kate, keep that targeting link stable no matter what." The plan that followed was unlike anything seen in galactic warfare before. The human ship accelerated directly toward the largest betrayer vessel, apparently on a suicide run. The enemy focused all their firepower on the approaching threat, just as Jake had hoped. At the last possible moment, the New Horizon dove beneath the enemy ship's firing line, while the Corellian vessel attacked from behind. But instead of conventional weapons, they fired something new, a combination of human quantum processing and Corellian biomechanical precision that the Void Swarm had helped them integrate in real time. The result was devastating. The hybrid weapon cut through the betrayers' shields like they weren't there, and their ship began breaking apart from the inside out. "It's working," Sam shouted over the sounds of battle. "The technology integration is creating effects neither species could achieve alone." But the fight wasn't over. The remaining betrayer ships regrouped and began a new attack pattern, this time trying to separate the human and Corellian vessels. They had learned from their mistake and wouldn't let the allies coordinate again. Zixthera made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of returning to her own ship, she moved to the human tactical station and began directly controlling the Corellian weapons from there. "What are you doing?" Jake asked. "Showing my people that cooperation is not weakness," she replied, her hands moving over controls that Sam had quickly adapted for her use. "If the War Prime can fight alongside humans, others will follow." The battle that followed became a legend in both species' histories. Humans and Corellians fought not as separate forces, but as a single unit, each covering the other's weaknesses and amplifying their strengths. The Void Swarm provided support by manipulating space itself, creating tactical advantages no conventional military doctrine had ever considered. The betrayer ships, designed to fight isolated enemies, couldn't adapt to the fluid cooperation they faced. One by one, they were outmaneuvered and defeated by tactics that combined human ingenuity, Corellian warrior skill, and void swarm reality manipulation. When the last enemy ship was destroyed, both crews cheered, but Zixthera's people cheered loudest of all. They had watched their leader fight without full armor protection and not only survive but triumph. "War Prime," Kelmore said over the comm, "you have shown us a new way of strength. Perhaps the old isolation was itself a weakness." The void swarm being reappeared on their screen, its starlight form seeming more stable than before. "You have passed the test of cooperation under pressure. Both your species show the potential to survive the Great Silence." Jake looked around at his crew, then at Zixthera, who was still standing at the human tactical station, with pieces of her armor scattered around her feet. "What happens now?" "Now we begin the great work," the being replied. "Building the ships and technologies needed to preserve our civilizations. It will take the combined efforts of dozens of species and many decades of cooperation." Dr. Park was already studying the technical data. "The scale of this project is incredible. We'll need to completely restructure how our species interact." "Yes," Zixthera agreed. "No more hiding behind armor, literal or metaphorical. No more isolation and mistrust. We must learn to work together as naturally as we once worked alone." Jake extended his hand to her in the human gesture of partnership. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her skin was warm and surprisingly soft despite its silver scales. "Partners?" he asked. "Partners," she confirmed. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the new joint human Corellian research station and watched construction ships from dozens of species working together on the first evacuation vessel. The ship was beautiful in a way that no single species could have achieved. A fusion of human innovation, Corellian biomechanical artistry, void swarm reality manipulation, and technologies from species he was still learning to identify. Zixthera joined him at the viewport. She now wore modified armor that could be quickly removed when cooperation required vulnerability, and she had become humanity's strongest advocate among the Corellian leadership. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked. "The joke that started all this?" She smiled, that transformative smile that had become famous across both their worlds. "Commander Jake Morrison, that joke may have saved our civilizations. Sometimes the best things begin with misunderstandings." "And sometimes," Jake replied, "the greatest alliances are built by people brave enough to take off their armor." Outside the viewport, the great work continued. Dozens of species that had once been enemies or strangers were now working together to save themselves and preserve the diversity of life in their galaxy. The Great Silence was still coming, but they would meet it not as isolated, frightened individuals, but as a united community of the willing. The armor was off, the barriers were down, and the future had never looked brighter.